From the depth of history, I am here to tell you my stories and make you feel them in your veins. Before we head to our story, please consider subscribing and liking this video, and if you don't want, never mind. So let's go. Romeo and Juliet. In the olden days, there lived in Verona two great families named Montague and Capulet. Both families were wealthy, and they were wise in most matters, like other wealthy families. But they were foolish and stubborn in one thing. There was an ancient feud between the two families, and instead of forgetting it, as wise families would do, they kept fueling it, not allowing it to die down. No member of the Montague family would speak to a Capulet if they met in the street, and vice versa. Or if they did speak, they would exchange bitter and rude words, usually ending in a fight. Even the relatives and servants of the two families were as foolish as the members themselves, to the extent that conflicts and street brawls were always arising from arguments between one member of one family and another of the other. The events begin with Lord Capulet, the head of the Capulet family, holding a grand feast, consisting of a large dinner and dance. Lord Capulet was so generous that he said anyone could attend the feast, except members of the Montague family, of course. However, there was a young member of the Montague family named Romeo, who desperately wanted to attend the feast, because Rosalind, the girl he loved, was invited to it. This girl didn't reciprocate his feelings at all, and he had no reason to love her. But he wanted to love someone, and since he hadn't met the right girl, he was forced to love the wrong one. So he went to the Grand Capulet feast, accompanied by his friends Mercutio and Benvolio. Romeo and Tybalt engage in a fight. Old Capulet welcomed him and his friends with great kindness, and Romeo, the young man, moved among the noble crowd in their velvet and satin attire, men with sword hilts and collars studded with jewels, women with shiny jewelry adorning their chests and arms, and precious gemstones decorating their shiny belts. Romeo himself was impeccably dressed, and although he wore a black mask over his eyes and nose, everyone could tell from his mouth, hair, and the way he held his head high that he was much more handsome than anyone else in the place. After a short while, amidst the dancers, he saw a girl of exquisite beauty, worthy of being loved, to the extent that he didn't even consider the invitee Rosalind, whom he thought he loved. He looked at that beautiful girl, moving gracefully in the midst of the dance hall in her white satin gown, and adorned with her jewelry, and it seemed to him that the whole world was worthless compared to her. He was saying this, or something similar, when Tybalt, the nephew of Lady Capulet, heard his voice and recognized him as Romeo. Tybalt became extremely angry, and immediately went to his uncle, telling him that a member of the Montague family had come to the feast without being invited. But old Capulet was so civilized that he wouldn't deal rudely with any man inside his house, and he asked Tybalt to remain calm. However, this young man only took the opportunity to quarrel with Romeo. Meanwhile, Romeo made his way to the beautiful girl, told her sweet words of love, and kissed her. At that moment, her mother sends for her, and Romeo then realizes that the girl who captured his heart was Juliet, the daughter of Lord Capulet, his sworn enemy. Therefore, he left the place, feeling regretful, of course, but still loving her. Romeo is enamored with Juliet. Then Juliet said to her maid, "Who is this young man who didn't want to dance?" "His name is Romeo, from the Montague family, the only son of your greatest enemy." Then Juliet went to her room and looked out of her window overlooking the lush garden illuminated by the moonlight. Romeo was hidden in that garden among the trees. He couldn't leave without trying to see her again. So, since she didn't know he was there, she spoke aloud, pouring out her heart, telling the quiet garden that she had fallen in love with Romeo, Romeo heard what she said and felt immense joy. He looked up from his hiding place and saw her beautiful face in the moonlight, framed amidst the vibrant climbing plants around her window. As he looked at her and listened to what she said, he felt as if he were living a dream cast by one of the enchanters in that beautiful, enchanted garden. Juliet said, "Well, why was Romeo named thus?" and added, "Since I fell in love with you, names no longer have any meaning." Romeo exclaimed, "Call me by my lover's name, and that will be my name, and I shall no longer be Romeo." And he emerged into the light of the full white moon from the place where he had been hiding among the cypress trees and ivy. At first, she felt frightened, but when she realized it was Romeo and not a stranger, she too felt happy, and as he stood in the garden below and she looked from the window, they talked long together, each trying to find the sweetest words in the world, resulting in the delightful conversation that transpired between the lovers. The details of everything they said and the sweet music that resulted from their voices must be narrated in a golden book that you children can read for yourselves one day. Time passed quickly, as it always does with lovers when they are together, to the extent that when the moment of farewell came, it seemed to them as if they had just met, and in fact, they didn't know how to leave each other. Juliet said, "I will send a messenger to you tomorrow." And thus, in the end, after much back and forth and longing, they bid each other farewell. Juliet entered her room, and a dark curtain covered her shiny window. And Romeo began to make his way through the quiet, dewy garden as if he were living a dream. On the morning of the next day, very early, Romeo went to Friar Lawrence and told him the whole story, begging him to marry him and Juliet immediately. After some discussion, the friar agreed to do so. So, when Juliet sent her old nurse to Romeo that day to see what he would do, the old lady conveyed a message to Juliet saying that everything was going well and that Romeo had made all the necessary arrangements for the marriage the next morning. Romeo and Juliet's marriage. The young lovers feared seeking their parents' approval for their marriage, as is customary, because of the ancient silly feud between their families. Friar Lawrence was ready to help the young lovers secretly, believing that once they were married, their parents would soon find out, and this marriage might put a happy end to the ancient feud. So, early in the morning of the next day, Romeo and Juliet were married in Friar Lawrence's house, and then they parted, exchanging kisses and tears streaming from their eyes. Romeo promised to come to her house's garden that night, and the nurse prepared a rope ladder from Juliet's window, so Romeo could use it to climb up to the window and talk to his beloved wife quietly and privately. But on that day, something terrible happened. Tybalt, the young man who was greatly angered by Romeo's attendance at the Capulets' party, met Romeo and his friends, Mercutio and Benvolio, on the way, and insulted Romeo, demanding to duel with him. Romeo didn't want to fight Juliet's cousin, but Mercutio drew his sword, and he and Tybalt dueled. Mercutio was killed. When Romeo saw his friend die, he forgot everything but his anger toward the man who killed him, and he fought with Tybalt until the latter lay dead. And so, on the same day, the nurse thinks Juliet has died. Lady Capulet rushed in, followed by Lord Capulet and Lord Paris, the groom. There lay Juliet, cold, pale, and motionless, beyond the power of all their lamentations to wake her. So, this day would be her burial day instead of her wedding day. Meanwhile, Friar Lawrence sent a messenger to Mantua with a letter to Romeo, informing him of all these events, and everything would have gone smoothly if the messenger hadn't been unable to reach Romeo. But sad news travels fast. Romeo's servant, who knew the secret of the marriage but was unaware of Juliet's supposed death, heard news of her funeral and rushed to Mantua to tell Romeo how his young wife had been taken by death and would lie in her grave. Romeo cried out, heartbreaking, "Is this how fate decrees? Then I shall lie with Juliet tonight." He bought poison for himself and immediately headed to Verona. He hurried to the graveyard where Juliet lay. She was not lying in a grave but in a burial vault. He forced open the door and was on his way down the stone steps leading to the vault, where all the Capulets dead lay, when he heard a voice behind him demanding he stop. It was Count Paris, who was to marry Juliet on this very day. Paris shouted, "How dare you, you Montague scoundrel, come here and defile the bodies of the Capulets dead?" Despite being nearly consumed by grief, poor Romeo tried to answer him gently. Paris said, "I have been told that you must die if you return to Verona." Romeo replied, "Then die I must, and so I have come here. Oh, gentle youth, leave and let me be. Go before I hurt you. The love in my heart for you exceeds my love for myself. Please go, and leave me alone." Paris retorted, "I refuse what you demand, and I will apprehend you, for you are a criminal." And he drew his sword, and in his anger and despair, Romeo fought with him and killed Paris. As Romeo's sword plunged into Paris's body, Paris cried out, "Oh, I am slain. If you be merciful, open the tomb and lay me with Juliet." Romeo said, "Truly, I will do so." Then Romeo carried the dead man to the tomb and placed him beside his beloved Juliet. Then he knelt beside Juliet and spoke to her, encircling her with his arms and kissing her cold lips. Believing her to be dead all the while, she was much closer to waking. Then he drank the poison and died beside his beloved wife. Romeo enters the graveyard. Afterward, Friar Lawrence arrived, but it was too late, and he saw everything that had happened. Then poor Juliet woke from her sleep to find her husband and her friend dead beside her. The commotion of the fight had drawn many people to the scene, and when the friar heard them, he fled and left Juliet alone. She saw the cup that had contained the poison and understood all that had happened. Since there was no poison left for her, she took Romeo's dagger and plunged it into her heart. Thus, she died after falling with her head on Romeo's chest. And here, the story of these two intensely faithful lovers of great misery ends. When the elders of both families learned of everything that had happened from Friar Lawrence, they were deeply saddened, and when they saw all the calamities that had resulted from the cursed feud between them, they decided to end it. Above the graveyard that held the bodies of their beloved children, they finally vowed to forget the past and restore bonds of friendship and goodwill anew. If you like my stories, please consider subscribing and sharing this video to be up to date. Now peace out, or something like this.